Hey guys, what is up? Carter here. Today's video is going to be all about bearing systems. As you can see, I've only got two knives with bearing systems currently in my collection. This is the Microtech SOCOM Delta. Has a captured bearing system in a little plastic insert in here, kind of like what Kershaw and Zero Tolerance uses. This one has actual IKBS. I should have put up a video taking this apart so you can check that out to see what exactly is in there. But basically it just has loose bearings, little tiny ball bearings in there. Kind of in there, really just held with grease, you know, keeping them in, so yeah. But aside from these two, I have owned multiple knives with bearing systems. I've had a Mikkel Wilhelmsen Alamo with IKBS. I've had the Zero Tolerance 055 or 0560 with their bearing system, their captured bearing system. I had my Direware Custom that had a bearing system, and maybe one or two more over the years that I've had. So I've had multiple knives with bearing systems. So the question that's being raised is, are bearing systems just a gimmick? You know, does it actually do anything? Is it worthwhile to put in a knife? And is it basically just a marketing ploy to sell knives? First off, I'd say no, absolutely not. Bearings have been used for many, many years to reduce friction in moving parts. In fact, you know, the introduction of bearing systems is kind of a revolution in machining and things like that. Even something like skateboards. Captured ball bearing system in the tires basically helped move skateboards from being just a novelty toy to, you know, an actual legitimate kind of sport. So you really wouldn't have X Games and things like that if ball bearings hadn't been introduced. So to say that a bearing system is intrinsically just a gimmick and doesn't actually provide any functional value to whatever mechanical system it's going into, I think is kind of ignorant. That being said, does that mean that it's necessarily worth the money to have it in there? Now that's a question that everybody has to answer on their own. Based on all the knives I've had with bearing systems, definitely smoother. Absolutely. You know, and there's a few that didn't do it that right or didn't do it well, and it's not that smooth. And I would say no. Regular washers would work just as well. But for the most part, the knives I've had that have implemented bearings well, such as my Mikkel Wilhelmsen Alamo, that thing, I mean, you open that up. Unfortunately, I've actually sold that knife, but when you'd open that thing, I don't know, it's hard to describe. I mean, it would just glide open, and yet it was completely solid. No movement whatsoever. You'd open that up, and you would assume that the pivot was extremely loose, and then you'd go to move the blade and it was rock solid. That one was extremely smooth. The Sampa, not a ton. I don't know, I can't really say for sure why, but it just seems like this would be just as good with regular washers. My only guess would be that, you know, being that it's a little bit of a lower cost knife, although it's fairly expensive for what it is, but still, you know, produced overseas, that maybe the tolerances weren't quite good enough to bring the maximum out of the bearing system, would be my only guess. But this one, on the other hand, is extremely smooth. Extremely smooth, and once again, you know, no blade play or anything, and it just, I would let it fall, but it's gonna cut me. But yeah, so I think it definitely increases the smoothness of the knife. And as far as negative things about having a bearing system, with IKBS, you could say taking it apart in the field could be problematic. You could easily lose some of those little bearings or have some trouble getting it back together. But with these thrust bearing systems, you know, the captured bearing systems, you don't really have that problem. It goes in basically like a washer. It's no different. So I don't think there's really any hindrance to having one. So really the only legitimate argument is it worth the extra money? I mean, usually knives with bearing systems, you know, obviously it's more expensive. It's more expensive to machine all the pieces so that the ball bearings actually go inside some sort of track. You know, it's not as easy as just throwing a washer in there. So washers are definitely cheaper. And that's, you know, like I said, that's only a question you can answer. I myself do not really have a sway either way. I would be fine if this knife didn't have a bearing system in it. But at the same time, I appreciate having it in there. So I'm not going to say I wish it did, or I'm glad it, or I'm sorry, I'm not going to say I wish it didn't, or I'm extremely glad it did. To me, it's really not an issue. I like smooth knives, but it's really not a huge deal. As long as it opens without hindrance, I'm fine with it, and that's just me. But yeah, I think the argument that it doesn't do anything for the knife or doesn't increase smoothness, you can put your hand on any number of bearing knives, and I don't see how you could refute that it doesn't add to the smoothness of the knife. I mean, I don't really see how you could not see that, but I can also see why some people don't think it's an improvement enough to want to pay the extra money for it. So that's my thoughts on the bearing systems that are currently out there. I prefer the captured bearing systems for the reasons I mentioned before. Easier to take down, easier to manage. Having those loose bearings in there is kind of scary. It's kind of a pain. Sometimes when you go to put it back together, they'll kind of clump together in the wrong way, and you struggle getting it back together and things. So I would definitely have to say that I like the captured bearing systems if I had to choose. But overall, I'm really kind of indifferent whether my knives do or don't have a bearing system. But I do definitely notice a difference in the knives that have them. Alright guys, take it easy. Have a good day. I'll catch you later.